Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kat, this is Kat Makes, and today we are learning to dress a slate frame. As we know with most types of embroidery, it's very important that your fabric is stretched taut in some kind of frame, but with Tambour embroidery we have an additional requirement, which is that we need to have both hands free, one to hold the tool and one to hold the thread underneath the embroidery. So you also need it to be suspended somehow in that frame, but that is actually not the reason that I almost always choose to use a slate frame. There's actually something that makes an even bigger difference. The biggest advantage to using a slate frame is that you can work on a piece of embroidery that is larger than the frame, even if you have beads. You can of course do this with a hoop if you don't have beads, but the addition of beadwork complicates things because you risk either crunching the beads by squeezing them in between those two layers of your embroidery hoop, or you end up with wonky, uneven tension. Speaking of tension, often with sheer fabrics especially, the fabric will loosen in the hoop over time, which causes problems, or it can behave weirdly, especially like in the bias sections, because that circular hoop is putting, hello friend, that circular hoop is putting pressure around all edges, 360 degrees instead of only on the grains of the fabrics. This is not true with a slate frame. It can't loosen over time, and since you're only putting tension on the lengthwise and crosswise grain, the bias can't cause any funny business. I had a couple of questions come up about setting up my slate frame for Tambour embroidery, so if you're Googling, this is called dressing a slate frame. And it just so happens that I am ready to dress my slate frame with my current project, which is the peacock inspired capelet, so that I can work on a new section. So that is what we're gonna do today, as soon as I finish petting the little gremlin. This is what my piece of embroidery looks like off the frame at the moment, and as you can see, there is a big empty space on my fabric. You can also see that I have basted around the edges, so that's my pattern piece. That's the edges of the pattern piece, and I'm going to be using that as a guide to show me where to frame up so that I can maximize how much embroidery I can fit into the frame. Before we get started, this is also a really good opportunity for me to show you what my naked slate frame looks like before we start putting it together. So this is just what the pieces look like. It has two of these short square bars that have these big holes in the sides of them, and then it has a piece of twill tape permanently attached. I've got it nailed in. A lot of times when you buy these, they're stapled. And two, there she is again, two long bars that have a series of holes drilled in them like this, right? Oh my goodness, hello! I made my slate frame myself. There's a blog post from ages ago, which I will add in the comments below if you're interested in how that happens. I did it with a drill, a handsaw, and a Dremel that had like one bit stuck in it, so I couldn't change the bit that was in the Dremel. So it is real rough if you look close, like you can see those drill holes in there. That's just crazy. But it does the job. I am going to be building a second slate frame soon so that I can have a second project on the go at any given time, and I want to make a few changes to the design, so I'll film that for you if you're interested. Let me know in the comments. But anyway, we've got our two long bars, our two short bars that have twill tape, and then I also have a couple more bundles of the same twill tape. This is a 2-inch wide variety. The width is very important. See if you can find approximately 2-inch or so wide twill tape. And then I also have a set of 4 of these little guys. So I've got a bolt, 2 washers, and a wing nut on the end, one for each corner of my slate frame. I'll show you how it all comes together in a little bit, don't worry. Some frames also use clamps or pins instead of bolts, so your mileage may vary depending on the frame that you have. And then I also have a big old box of pins. I like to use the Dritz Superfine pins for this, but just use whatever you've got around is fine. One last note before we begin, the very most important thing that you can do to ensure success at this stage is to keep your fabric on grain. However you mark the fabric to indicate that you're on grain is fine. You can pull out a thread, you can rip it along one of the edges, whatever you do. Just know that a careful setup at this point will lead to a neater result in the end. It's like when you're learning to drive, right? And they tell you to keep the rear view mirror in your periphery. You need to be checking that everything's still on grain like every 30 seconds, okay? All right, Stella would also really like to learn how to dress a slate frame, so we're gonna take her along for the ride. Starting with the disassembled frame, we're going to deal with the bars that have the twill tape permanently attached first. With my frame, this means we're dealing with the short bars, though this isn't a requirement for slate frames. The longer ones could be the ones with the permanently attached twill tape, depending on what kind of frame you have. If you're working on a project that fits entirely into your frame, you won't have to fuss as much as you can see I'm doing here. I'm paying special attention to my basting to make sure I can get the area I need in the frame. So what we're going to do is set up by pinning the fabric to the twill tape attached to those short bars. Make sure that your pin goes in and out a couple of times. I like to start by placing one pin in the middle and then pop a placeholder in at each edge, and then what I'm going to be doing is working out from each edge. At this point, it's really, really important to keep an eye on that grain. You can see sort of making sure that everything is nice and straight and then fixing up that grain a little bit. This is such an important step. Once you're happy with the placeholder pins, start in the middle of your piece of twill tape and work out to each edge, pinning in and out, so weaving that pin in and out a couple of times, and placing the next pin immediately following so that you don't have any large gaps. We're not going for stretching here at all, you just want it to be straight, very importantly on grain and flat against the twill tape. Folks prefer to use a basting stitch instead of a pin for this stage, and that is technically a more correct method, but I find I get better control with pins. It means that you can go back and adjust individual areas if you need to, and with my particular setup there are no negative side effects to doing it this way. Some folks also roll their bars over a few times before assembling the frame, and if I were doing that, I wouldn't want to use pins because the heads would distort the fabric. Once the first side is done, partially assembling the frame is going to give me a better indication of where the design will sit in the frame. You don't have to do it at this stage, you could do it after you've done your second short bar, but I like to do it after the first. So to do that, I'm going to insert the long bars into the holes that are in the short bars and then lay out my fabric so I kind of know where I am, and then it's time to pop in the bolts. Only 2 of the bolts at this stage. Only adding 2 bolts on the side that I've already pinned. The bolt assembly has a washer on the bottom and another one on the top, and then it finishes off with a wing nut to secure everything, and it's held in place with that tension. There's no tension on the fabric, as you can see, since we've only pinned one side, but we do want to make sure that the holes we choose to go through on each side line up with each other. Otherwise, we'll end up with a non-rectangular parallelogram and everything will end up off grain despite all your hard work. Now we're on to the second side, and again, we're just making sure that everything is on grain. Although the frame looks assembled, there's still no tension, and that shorter bar is just chilling there without any bolts holding anything in place. So it can move around a little bit if it wants to. I'm letting the organza lay on the table and focusing here on getting the entire piece I want in the frame, so you can see that little short bar will just move if I give it a little tug, and then making sure everything is on grain. Once I'm happy with the layout, I'll pin it exactly the same as the first side. Placeholder in the middle and then one at each edge, and then weaving pins into the tape with gaps as even as possible, starting at the center and working my way out. Depending on your fabric, being able to see the grain line may be very, very easy, like it is for me here, or very difficult. You can mark the middle if you need to, or space out markings along the edge with chalk, or anything else you need to do in order to make it really obvious that everything is straight. But make sure at this point that you're taking your time here and making sure that that grain is exactly perfect. Now we're going to add our first little bit of tension. I've taken the nuts off of my bolts, and I'm going to use both hands to pull the long bar back along that short bar until it's taut. How tightly you stretch depends on your fabric, but you're looking for a little bit of resistance here, but not so much that the fabric starts to rip away from the pins at the corners. That is a weak point. Pull first and figure out which hole that you're going to be inserting that bolt into. You'll have to let go in order to add each bolt, that's fine, but again, we want both bolts to go through corresponding holes in the frame on each side so that everything is squared up. So I'm just going to take that bolt, as you can see it's got the washer on it, and insert it through the bottom so that it comes up the hole in the long bar, and then I'm going to add my second washer, get that fabric out of the way so that you can see what's going on, add my second washer, and then the wing nut on top, and tighten everything up. And once that wing nut is on there, all nice and tight, everything is going to be held into place. Until the wing nut is tight, I still have to hold it with my hand, as you can see there. So that's the final tightening, and then when you let go, everything should stay. So repeat that for the second bolt, washer on, wing nut on, holding everything in place until it's all the way secure. And at this point, that's the fourth bolt, so all 4 are in place, and we finally do have a little bit of tension. As you can see, there's a really obvious ripple still, and when I run my hands across, I can sort of bounce it a little bit. The tension's maybe halfway there. When I run my hand across, you can really see that vertical ripple because we haven't done the sideways tensioning yet, and also when I pull on it, it sort of shifts very easily from side to side. So now we need to do the tensioning with our wrapped twill tape around the long bars. Remember how I said 2-inch twill tape was really important? We're inserting a pin each time we wrap the tape around the bar, and you want the twill tape to be just a little bit wider than the pin so that we can get that nice even spacing, just like we did for the pins on the short bars, which means since my pins are just under 2 inches long, I want my twill tape to be about 2 inches wide. When you do your first side, you want to make sure that that grain line is correct right from the start and stay on it the whole way down. As you wrap, don't pull backwards towards the bar really firmly because you'll end up putting more tension on one side, especially as you move towards the middle, and you'll end up with sort of a banana-shaped curve in your grain line. If you do this and then embroider a project, the fabric is going to try to relax back to its original shape when it comes off the frame, and it can cause wonky problems with your embroidery. One way to combat this if you have the space is to do these wraps on both sides of the frame at the same time. So do one wrap and pin and then go to the other side of the frame, wrap and pin over there, and come back and keep going back and forth like this, which makes sure that your embroidery is definitely going to be on grain and well tensioned, but as long as you keep yourself on a straight grain line for your first side, you shouldn't run into any problems when you go to do your second. In addition to keeping an eye on the grain line, you want each pin to go in right next to the one before it so that you can achieve a nice straight line of twill tape folded over those pins when you're done. This helps tension the fabric evenly. I also try my very hardest to make sure that the pin points end up on top of the twill tape so that when I fold the tape over, the business end of the pin is enclosed, because the cardinal rule is blood, sweat, and tears are all good, but you gotta keep it off the project. Just carry your way on down until you get to the other end of the bar, and when you arrive at the end, our final wrap is going to be needing to be treated a little bit differently so that everything is nice and secure. So we're going to do that wrap, place our last pin right in there, and then you're going to want to pull back on the tape ever so slightly so that you can pin the tape to the last wrap. And then I usually just like to bundle up any leftover twill tape that I haven't used into a little jelly roll and pin it into the frame just to keep it out of the way. You don't want to cut this because inevitably you're going to end up needing it for a future project. So pinning it there just keeps it nice and secure, and then we can move on to our next side. If you have excess fabric like I do, tuck it underneath so that you can access that bar for wrapping, and you can bundle it up a little bit to get it out of the way if you need to as well. Then begin your pinning and wrapping exactly the same way as you did for your first time. You do want to be adding a little bit of tension here, but focus more on the grain line and making sure that things are not getting warped, especially again as you approach the middle. Now is also a good time for me to do a little do as I say, not as I do lesson. I really want my piece to fit into the frame in 3 frame dressings, which means I need every single centimeter of width that I can get out of this frame. You'll make your life a lot easier if your pinning line is parallel to the long bar at least 3 inches away from said bar. I'm about 1 inch away from this bar, which is making it a bit tight to squeeze my big old roll of tape through. This is possible, but it's unpleasant, and your life will be easier if you just give yourself a little bit of space, unlike me. So here's what the tension of the fabric looks like as you're going. So this little section here has tension on one side but not the other, and you can see we've still got a little bit of a ripple, whereas if I go down to the side where I've tensioned both sides, you can't see any of that ripple at all, and that's what we're kind of going for here, is drum tight. So we're going to do our final wrap just as before, pull that back and tension it against the last piece of twill tape, that last wrap that we did, and then just pin the excess out of the way, and then we are just about done, but we have a little bit of excess fabric to take care of here. So what I like to do with this is roll it all up like a little jelly roll and then just pin it to my twill tape on one side. So I'm going to make this roll as tight as I feel comfortable making it. The tighter you make it, the less it's going to shift around, and we don't necessarily want it rubbing on itself in there. So I do this little jelly roll along the length of the edge so that all of the beadwork is nice and enclosed until I need it later, and then I'm just going to pin it along that edge so that it stays out of the way as I carry on and do more embroidery. You can wrap this up in a little bit of tissue paper if you would like. I just try to keep the space clean. And that works well enough for me, but that is totally up to you. And there we have it. My slate frame is dressed and I am ready to stitch again. I like to prop my frame up between my sewing desk and my work desk, which is quite literally right here where I'm sitting. So I'll pop a little picture of what that looks like, my little setup. Since it's of course important that the frame be suspended on something, but I will say that it's very common to see people using trestles, and I even have a friend that uses sawhorses because they're cheaper to prop up her frame, but whatever works for you. I just use the desks because I'm light on space. But anyways, I'm gonna end this video here because I would really like to get some stitching done on my project tonight. So if you would like to see how far I've gotten, come hang out on Instagram or TikTok, or just stick around here and I'm sure I'll show it to you eventually. But I hope you're having a great day and I'll see you later. Bye!